Gender equality is now a cross-cutting theme in the SDGs, and the importance of this fact is that now we will be able to promote differentiated measures for the most ambitious agenda of the current days, meaning that women and men have differentiated needs and interests, and they exercise their rights in a different way. So this is why when having gender equality as a cross-cutting issue will imply that states have a mandate to promote the well-being of all women and girls of all ages, of all human condition, and in each of the goals that have been agreed on. This is a very comprehensive agenda, and for the first time we look forward also to update the content that had been agreed in the human rights instruments of the 90s, so that new challenges such as climate change are also dealt with a gender perspective. The inclusion of gender equality as a cross-cutting theme in the SDGs means in practice that we need to face the challenge on linking what's the bond between equality and water and sanitation in relation to gender equality. How does a state can promote policies for climate change and gender equality, and how is it that we can promote policies on security and gender equality? So it is indeed a huge challenge. For instance, in water and sanitation, even though it's not spelled out clearly there, we're looking for instance, indicator on menstrual hygiene, or to address all of the challenges, the specific challenges that women and girls face in the world. So the SDGs poses a very huge challenge because all of the topics such as security, infrastructure, health and education, and oceans and seas. I mean, there's a huge broad of topics that usually are only looked at as gender neutral. And now that the challenge of gender equality is here to stay, we need to start making the links and connecting the dots. I think that the biggest challenge is also addressing the structural problems. For instance, Goal 5 says that we need to promote the eradication of all forms of discrimination against women and also all forms of violence against women. But there are also two big challenges, such as in terms of sexual and reproductive health and rights, that were only achieved in a very narrow scope in the SDGs, but also in relation to redistributing and reducing unpaid domestic and care work. So the challenge to me in this respect is that we need to go for the highest interpretation of implementation, so that at the regional level we can all go and advance further, standing from where we are, rather than lowering our standards to the minimum denominator. In that regard, for instance, SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, can be accomplished, even though in the paper it's not as ambitious as what we can have it in reality. The SDGs and the climate change Paris Agreement are totally related. The Paris Agreement is going to be a binding agreement of some sort, addressing mitigation, adaptation measures, and the means of implementation, meaning finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. Whereas the SDGs is a more powerful document in terms of political will. So the Paris Agreement is aspiring to have a 2 degrees global warming. And so we are hoping that the connection with the SDGs will help us actually to improve the target so as to not increase into 1.5 degrees. And this will have all to do with gender equality, because we're trying to bring gender equality and the human rights frameworks into the Paris Agreement. It is very challenging. we're facing a lot of problems because of that. Some countries think this is a technical issue and that's it. But we think that with the proper link with the SDGs, there will be proper measures for mitigation, adaptation, and the means of implementation as are stated in Goal 13 related to climate change. So we hope there is a way in which both documents are intertwined into a much closer level of implementation. And that way we can help with the climate ambition as well as with the social and economic dimension that, of course, is highlighted in the SDG spirit. The expectations from Paris are complex. On the one hand, there is a true commitment on parties to work to diminish the gas emissions. But on the other, there are so many economic interests at stake that it will be very difficult to achieve what we need to transform our economy so that we actually develop a society of sustainable production and consumption. So, in that regard, I would be cautious about thinking that this will be the major transformation the world is facing, but it is indeed a very good starting point. For instance, in in a transition towards a clean, safe, appropriate, socially and environmentally sound technology, if we get the language right, I think that's a very good point of view. And also, of course, it will depend if we manage to get the human rights language and gender equality, because then you will see that a healthy planet is also related to so many other issues such as indigenous people's rights and local communities and access to participation, but also the fair share of the responsibilities between north and south. So there is a big commitment, I think, at this point for governments to achieve some sort of outcome. Whereas that outcome is at the level of the needs of the world, I think that is still to be seen, and there's a huge battle now that is taking place in Paris. And as civil society, we're doing as best as we can, and we see that some governments have all the will. So let's keep our high hopes until the end.